Hi, I'm Susan Dixon. Welcome to our October monthly meeting. Chinese Historical Society of Southern California has monthly meetings the first Wednesday of every month at 7 o'clock. So a year ago, the Louis Family Foundation funded a grant to create an online exhibit about Grandview Gardens. The Louis Family Foundation supports community organizations. And this was a major project for us. We had interns that use a lot of primary documents, whether it's photos, maps, newspapers, to do research. But then our next step was to contact the Wong family, and we interviewed them. It was a bonanza because this was a family that was interested in their own family history, and as well as they were interested in the history of the restaurant. And they were very generous in sharing their stories with us. So last May, we had a monthly meeting that showed about the exhibit that was created, and it's terrific. You can go to our website to access it. But I thought the whole story hadn't been told to the public. So therefore, I invited Carol Wong and her cousin Calvin to share with us some of their remembrances. So Calvin will be speaking first. Actually, the video on his camera, on his computer isn't working, but we will hear his interesting stories and see his wonderful PowerPoint. Now, Calvin's spent his early years in Chinatown, but then he moved away. He attended Cal Poly Pomona, and he started his career in IT with Hughes Aircraft while getting an MBA at USC in business. Sophia attended USC. She had a career in wholesale fashion industry. Currently, she is a store and events manager in the Santa Monica National Recreation Area. So while Calvin is talking, we invite all of you to put your questions in the chat. And after he finishes, Sophia will continue. And then at the end, our president, Eugene Moy, will conduct the question and answers. So enjoy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Susan. Again, my name is Calvin Wong. I'm the son of Doc Wong. And what I'm going to talk about is our family memories of Grandview Gardens. They're from the Doc Wong children, Carol, Clifford, me, Calvin, and Curtis. Our memories are from stories passed down to us and our own personal experiences at Grandview Gardens. Next, please. So here we have the subjects I'll be covering. Of course, I will start off by a short bio about my father, Doc Wong, the co-owner of Grandview Gardens. Then I'm going to kind of march through a timeline. There's the old Grandview Gardens in Old Chinatown. Henry Wong was the owner then. And then we'll transition to the new Chinatown. Harwell Hamilton Harris, what era I call it, he's the architect for Grandview at that time. Then I'll talk about the Grandview Gardens that Tyrus Wong's paintings were made for, and another architect, Savius Doshi. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of my dad in the railroad yard by Old Chinatown. He's a very young man, as you can tell. He was born in 1918, Nicholas Hay Chung, to Fay and Jenny Chung in Riverside, California. He was then adopted by his father, Henry Wong, and his name was changed to Doc Hong Wong in 1919. Next slide, please. And in 1924, he started school at Macy Street Primary School. And there's his class picture. And I hope you can see the names where Norman and Doc are. That's them as a primary school students. Shortly thereafter, Henry Wong opens Grandview Garden on North Alameda Street in Los Angeles. And we have the next picture, please. Slide, please. So here is Grandview Gardens in the old Chinatown. If you notice, there's a chop suey sign, there's a railroad sign, and a car in front of it. That's where Grandview Gardens was back in the 1930s. And if you could look to the left of the photo, there's a man crossing the street. That is Ferguson Alley. And today, if you were driving south on Alameda, past the railroad station, Union Station, there's an on-ramp for the 101 freeway. That's where Ferguson Alley is. And there's a park next to it, so that's where Grandview Gardens would have been if it would still exist. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of one of our uncles, Uncle Jack. He's one of the three brothers of Henry Wong, my father, and Uncle Norman. He's standing in front of Grandview Gardens. Notice then, Grandview Gardens is actually Grandview Gardens. As opposed when it was open in New Chinatown, it became one word, Grandview and then Gardens. It was 749 and a half North Alameda Street. Now the half is because upstairs was the restaurant. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a photograph in the LA Times about 1938. This was after a police raid closing the gambling joints there. And again, Grandview Gardens was on the second floor, and who knows what went on the ground floor and basements. Next slide, please. This picture, in 1935, Henry Wong passed away. At that time, my dad was at Lincoln High, and all we know about his high school years is that he played basketball. So you can see there's a picture on the left. He was on the varsity basketball team. And on the right, he played for the Loa basketball team, and you can see there's trophies in front of him. They did very well. NPR actually had a story that talked about Chinese basketball, and they do mention the LA team, and they were a very, very good basketball team. Okay, Ken, hold on here. So after the passing of Henry Wong, I'm not sure who ran Grandview Gardens, as my dad went on to study engineering at USC, and his brother was at school as well. But in 1939, my dad stopped going to USC to start a new business venture with his brother, Norman. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you would guess, the new venture is Grandview Gardens in New Chinatown. And I want to talk about that photo on the left. This is a special photo for me because it's a model of Grandview Gardens, and actually it was in our home. It was fairly large, could sit on a tabletop, as I say, maybe 3 feet long by 2 feet. And it depicts Grandview Gardens pretty well, as you can see. The roof came off, and you can look inside and see the layout of the restaurant. So it was kind of a really nice model, and we played with it. I remember knocking down one of the walls and trying to glue it back up. Eventually, my mom threw it away, unfortunately, because that would have been a wonderful heritage gift to rest of our family. As for Grandview Gardens, they moved it in 1939. They bought some land, and my Uncle Norman and Dad got Harwell Hamilton Harris as an architect for the new restaurant. Back then, he was a well-known architect of his time. He knew and was influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright and Richard Neutra, who was he apprenticed for. Both of them did a lot of homes in Los Angeles area. There weren't too many, as we know, Harwell Hamilton doing uh, commercial items. So this was kind of unique. As you can tell by the model, it was a unique restaurant in Chinatown. You couldn't confuse it with other restaurants. It had these vertical oak, excuse me, red oak um, panels going across the building. It was quite modernistic looking. And Harwell also did some unique interior design and furniture. So can we go to the next slide? Okay, so here's the interior of Grandview Gardens, and this is a very early picture of it. There's the Buddha room. It's where the bar was. It was by Hill Street, and you notice it had what I call crumpled aluminum foil. The story was they were looking at some other options, and it turned out they didn't have enough money, so they went with the crumpled aluminum. It's a very distinctive look. Many years later, that aluminum turned to copper colors, what I call, due to the nicotine smoke that was smoked by many people at that time. And to the right is the dining room. As again, this was an early picture. It looks like it is looking east. And later on, I don't remember those panels being there, but the furniture was there, as I remember, back when I was going to Grandview Gardens for meals. Their furniture, of course, was influenced by design by Harris, the architect. Okay, next picture, next slide, please. Okay, so excuse me, there's something in the picture here. I'm going to talk about the war years. So they started the restaurant in 1940, but the wars interrupted that in 1942 to 1945. I do not know what happened to the restaurant at that time because both my dad and my uncle, Norman, Sophia's father, had joined the army, the military service. So I don't know who ran the restaurant. In fact, I don't know if it was just closed down. But I did a short timeline of his time. He joined the Air Force in 1943. He graduated second lieutenant as an instructor for the B-24 bombers. And I have a quick timeline because it really interested me because I never knew it until I read his Army records. So on July 2nd, he gets assigned to Liberal, Kansas as a flight instructor and liaison to the Chinese pilots from China being trained there. And then July 7th, he gets a 15-day leave of absence. And between the 2nd and 7th of July, I believe he proposed to my mother and she accepted. So he got a 15-day leave of absence. And the 21st, they get married at the Presidio in San Francisco to my mother, Violet Chun Wong. And on next day, July 22nd, he starts assignment in Liberal, Kansas. And it wasn't a long stay. Of course, the war ends several weeks later, and they return to Los Angeles. I have an additional, if I can bring it up here. So I have some additional information. My mom writes, it tells me that when they went to Liberal, Kansas, no one would rent them a place. So the Army stepped in to get them a room. And I have a letter from that she wrote back then. And here's what it says. There's nothing too modern here and such a dusty city. We're living at a 5-room court and the reputation for cockroaches is atrocious. So far, I kept them away with powder, spray, and a clean kitchen. So that was the living conditions they lived in. And of course, fortunately, they did not have to live there very long because the war ended. Okay, can we have the next slide, which is a movie, so don't start the movie until I tell you. Okay, I'm going to give some background about this movie. It was taken by my grandfather, Kai Chun, in 1946. And it shows the buildings and people in Chinatown when he took the movie. And we'll make comments as the video is played. Of course, as you can notice, the start of the movie is the outsides of Grandview Gardens. The Buddha room is right behind those windows. And again, Grandview Gardens, Grandview is one word and Gardens is a separate word, which is different from the one in Old Chinatown. I don't know, was it done on purpose to keep the restaurants separate, because the old Grandview Gardens may have kept running, and this way they can distinguish between the two. Okay, let's start the movie. Okay, that's Hill Street, and the car is driving by. That's my dad, Doc Wong, and there's Hill Street coming down, and what just shot by was the greater Chinatown, and there's Uncle Norman, Sophia's father. And I really don't know who these folks are, but you can see the background. There's the red booth. I remember people used to go and get their picture taken by sticking their heads in cutouts. That is the cook by Golden Pagoda. He's waving to us. And there's Mangello, General Lee's today. And there's Uncle Norman pointing out, I don't know who he is, but I assume he worked there. And now Uncle Norman's walking down the street, and there's my mom. Then there's Phoenix Bakery, my favorite place. And here's some more people walking down the street, the plaza. I don't know who they are. And again, these are people leaving on Hill Street. I don't know who they are. And this guy I do. He is Raymond Yip, and he's a bartender. And one of the people who used to come down to drink his daiquiri was Bob Hope. And my mom told a story that they were told he was coming down. They went down, and they actually saw Bob Hope coming in. Again, some more people leaving. I don't know who they are, but you can see the area. Oh, this is Harold. He's a longtime head waiter at Chinatown or Grandview Gardens. And again, you can see the wishing well in the back, Manjin Lo. I don't know who this is. Oh, I think the movie stopped. Okay, that's fine. There's a little bit more, but not much. So can we go to the next slide? Okay, I do want to talk about Wong's frozen food. There's a connection here. My dad started Wong's frozen food business. The link to Grandview Gardens, because that's where the kitchen, Grandview Gardens kitchen, where the food was developed. And my cousin Sophia told me that her father was also involved with the frozen food business at that time. So I shout out to her dad for helping us out. So the frozen food business did very well. It was mostly on the West Coast, and I knew it at some time. My dad traveling East Coast trying to expand his business. But in 1963, my dad sells Calvin Wong, which is the company that did the manufacturing of the frozen food, to Gino Palucci, and he starts a food brokerage business. But my dad tells me a story about why he sold Chun Wong. Basically, Gino Palucci made an offer to my dad that he couldn't refuse, or shouldn't refuse maybe. Gino told my dad, I'm going to give you a good price for your company, and if you don't take the offer, I'm going to come in and sell my Chungking brand at a lower price, and I'm going to wipe you out. So what do you want to do? Of course, my dad sold it. So that's the story about why Chun Wong sold. Basically, Gino Palucci wanted the manufacturing unit because he wanted to sell Gino pizzas and Chungking there, and he didn't have the manufacturing there. He would have done his own, so he found it easier just to use the existing facilities. Chun Wong is phased out within a year, I think. I was watching for commercials and newspapers for him. They seemed to disappear shortly after Gino bought the company. Okay, so that's the story of that. So next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is about what I remember about Grandview Gardens back in the 50s. I was very young. I was in elementary school, and the souvenir picture I saw reminded me of many things. I remember that when we had dinner there on the weekends, a lady or man would walk around asking people if they want their photo taken. And here's an example of what happened. They took the photo. I remember the flash going off, and I imagine they filled out the card and they would mail them to them later with the picture in it. Also, I remember the lady walking around with a tray of cigars and cigarettes, saying cigars, cigarettes. For entertainment, there was a band led by Zepp Meister. He would play dance music, and a blonde singer would sing popular songs at that time. And I assume popular songs. I mean, I remember her singing, but I don't exactly remember what the songs were. As you can see in the picture there, most of the people at the restaurants were Caucasian. There were no Chinese as I can remember. We may have been the only family eating there. The workers in Grandview were all Chinese. They were like family. I remember calling some of them uncle, although they were not related to us. I remember when we were dining there, we rarely chose from the menu. Either my mom would just tell the waiter what we wanted, or my dad would walk into the kitchen and order what he wanted. So the dinner was very special. I mean, there were things obviously on the menu they didn't eat. Customers did not eat. But I remember my dad really liked oxtail soup. So my favorite foods back then when I was young were mostly what I call finger food. I remember liking the paper wrapped chicken that was in rice paper, battered shrimp rings, barbecue spare ribs, egg rolls, and the almond cookies. Actually, there was quite a lot more, but I probably would name off the whole menu. So that's what I remember in the 1950s about Grandview Gardens. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is Grandview Gardens, what I call the Tyrus Wong Salvia Stoshi era 1962-1976. So in 1962, Grandview was remodeled. I remember Dad having to sign a sign a agreement with Tyrus Wong for 2 murals. You can see the murals in the slide itself. They were very large. One was in the Buddha room that stretched across the wall itself, so it was quite big, and also the dining room. So if back then, if you were walking to the dining room, it basically covered the wall where the bandstand used to be in the back. And to the right is a picture of Grandview Gardens when it was after it was remodeled. This was the work done by an architect named Stoshis. He did Lowry's and Tam O'Shanter, so that's some of the places he did. And the sign itself was done by Milton Kwan. Of course, both Tyrus and Milton worked for Disney's, and they were very well-known artists back in those times, and today, really. So after that, Dad goes to Hong Kong and brings a chef to run the kitchen. And so it started and it worked. It got very busy, and busy enough where my siblings and I came down to help out at Grandview Garden. I was a busboy, so I'll tell you 2 stories I remember being a busboy. The first story was one of my jobs was to fill glasses with water. So I walk around and filling glasses, and I came to this one glass that it looked kind of strange. It was tall and skinny. So I filled it, and I immediately noticed something was wrong because the expression on the lady looked of shock. So I turned away and I ran up the chain of command. I went to my sister and informed her what had happened. I remember she went to the waiter and said, "Calvin poured water in the drink." The waiter went to the head waiter and said, hey, whatever happened. And then I noticed the head waiter walking over and taking the glass and saying something to the lady. I imagine he probably asked her, what drink did you have? And he walks away and later comes back and puts down the drink. So I remember that one. And then the other one was, one of my job as a busboy was to carry out the dishes to put in a cupboard, I guess, so the waiters can come by and collect them to put on the table. While I was walking out the kitchen door, getting clean dishes from the dishwasher, I tripped. And then, as you imagine, I made a very loud crash, and all of a sudden, Grandview became dead silence. And then, of course, it eventually came a little bit more as people talked, and one of the waiters came and helped me cleaned up. And I remember looking up at him, and as a young man, I remember that parent look you get when you did something wrong, like, boy, are you in trouble. So those are two things I remember about Grandview Gardens when I was as a busboy. Fortunately, despite my help, Grandview Gardens continued to prosper into 1969. A fire in the kitchen broke out, which eventually altered the course of Grandview Gardens. So this gave a time for my dad and my uncle Norman to rethink the business model. So what did they decide to do is serve dim sum in the Hong Kong style. So they fixed the restaurant. My dad went back to Hong Kong again and brought back a dim sum chef. When Grandview reopened, it opened also a new era for Chinatown. Needless to say, it was very successful. People coming to Grandview Gardens now were mostly Chinese. So the sound, smells, and atmosphere was totally different at that point in time. I also remember what changed was also the way people behaved, because I remember it didn't happen before when people were eating there, but I remember people fighting over the check, and I think that's something the Chinese people do. They kept saying, "I'll pay, no, I'll pay," and they go through that scenario. Okay, my last remembrance of Grandview Gardens, because at that time in the 70s, I've been going to college, and I started to work at Hughes Aircraft. So one time we're at Hughes in 1976, because it was just before it closed, and I called my dad because we're about to leave before lunch, and I said, "Hey, Dad, can I bring my friends down to Grandview Gardens for lunch?" So we went down there. We had lunch. My dad came out and introduced himself and asked how they were doing. And we left. But years later, one of the people had retired. This is about 25 years later. His name was Harry Carter. I went to his retirement lunch. And he came by and said, "Gee, I remember that lunch we had at Grandview Garden. That was a great lunch and something I'll remember forever." So with that memory, I am going to end my presentation and turn it over to my cousin Sophia.
Thank you, Calvin. Okay, I'm Sophia Wong, daughter of Norman Wong. Next slide, please. So my father first arrived to this country from the Guangdong province in China when he was 6 years old. I believe this is the photo that was used for his passage into the US. He told me his first stop was at Angel Island in San Francisco, where he was held for a short time before coming down to the LA area. He told me that he was adopted, which I think Calvin mentioned. He and his two brothers were adopted, and he told me that your grandpa had two wives. Next photo, please. And the next slide is a family photo. So there we see Grandpa with his 2 wives and 2 of his 3 sons. My father, Norman, is on the left with his mother, and Uncle Doc is on the right with his mother. And I wish I could have so many conversations because I have so many questions for Daddy, but I didn't know that he was a Boy Scout along with Uncle Doc. And I was a Girl Scout my entire life, from Brownies all the way through being a senior in high school, so all the way as a senior Girl Scout. So I would have loved to have asked my father what it was like to be a Boy Scout back then. Next slide, please. The next slide is kind of rare because this is the only slide, the only photo that I think we have of the 3 brothers. So we see Uncle Jack. He was the oldest of the 3 boys. He's on the far left. Then on the far right is my father, Norman. And then in the middle is Uncle Doc. And there's Grandpa and one of our grandmothers. So as Calvin mentioned, Grandpa opened the original Grandview Gardens, which was located in Alameda Street. And next slide, please. And this is a photo of Grandpa as a young man. And you can see here, this was taken at Plaza Gallery at it looks like 513 North Main Street. But you can see how dapper he was. And at this time, it was probably around the time that he may have been opening Grandview Gardens. However, I didn't know until the last few years, really, that there was an original Grandview Gardens in Old Chinatown. What I knew was what my father told me about Grandpa. And he would say, your grandpa had gambling halls, opium dens, and concubines. And he was the leader of the Tongs. And he also told me, your grandpa learned English in 1 month. And so I asked him, how did he learn it in only a month, learn English so quickly? And the response was, in jail. Your grandpa got out of jail early by paying off the mayor. So next slide, please. And here in the next slide, we can see another set of photos of Grandpa. This is a set of his mugshot. And what Daddy would tell me was that Grandpa would smuggle opium in by boats in the middle of the night and would have it dropped in the water, and then female divers would retrieve the opium. And interestingly, Calvin showed a shot from the LA Times of a raid by the police, and it happened to be right in front of Grandview Gardens. So I wish I could talk to Daddy and ask him all sorts of questions now. But so I had no idea about Grandpa's, his occupation as a restaurateur. Next slide, please. So my father told me that his first home in the United States was exactly where Union Station is located. And that was the original Chinatown. And so when Union Station was going to be built, the Chinese community decided, we're going to stay a community, we need to relocate. And that's when they relocated to the new Chinatown. He also told me that underneath Union Station, that there are many artifacts buried from his original neighborhood, the original Chinatown. Next slide, please. So here's my father. Oh, I forgot to mention. So so Union Station opened on May 3rd, 1939, and there were 500,000 spectators at that grand opening. And here's a photo of my father at the grand opening of the new Chinatown, or what we call now Chinatown. And this photo was taken on June 25th, 1938. And I have a lot of photos that my father took of the grand opening of New Chinatown. And a couple of them show are photos of the governor of California. And it's been confirmed that that fellow in the photos is the governor of California. So he was at the grand opening then. Next photo, please. So here's a photo taken in the 1940s of Grandview Gardens. And on the right side, kind of above that dark colored car, that was the area which was the Buddha room. It was the bar, and the piano lounge was located there. And on the far left end of the photo, that was the rear of the restaurant. And that is where the Imperial Dining Room was located. And that's where there was also live music. There was a band and a wooden dance floor in that section. Next photo. And Calvin mentioned how Grandview Gardens for a while was a workplace for him. But for myself and some of my siblings, we kind of saw Grandview Gardens as a giant playroom. We were there sometimes before the restaurant opened. And so it was like a huge playroom for us. In the 1960s, there was a very popular TV show called Get Smart. And we loved watching that show. And in the opening credits of Get Smart, Don Adams, who played Maxwell Smart, Agent Smart, he walks down a series of huge corridors with big metal doors, and they would close and clank behind him. And then when he gets to the very end, there's a telephone booth. He walks inside, starts to dial a number, then turns towards the front of the phone booth, which is the top half is glass. And he just suddenly drops as if he's dropping into it. The telephone booth is a hidden elevator, and he just drops down. So we used to take turns going into the telephone booth in Grandview Gardens. And we would pretend we were Agent Smart, walking down through on the carpeted foyer area, walking into the phone booth, pretending we were dialing, and then we turn to the front of the phone booth, and our siblings would laugh and we'd drop down suddenly. So that was a really fun game. Another really fun game for us was we go into we get almond cookies from the cookie jar, and we would remove the almonds and hold our hands out and place the almonds on our fingertips so that it was like fingernails. And the game was we try to balance 5 almonds on our fingernails and pretend that we got like a manicure. But don't worry, we didn't put the cookies back in the cookie jar after that. Another really fun game was our governess Joan would take us to Grandview Gardens, often on weekend nights. And at the end of our meal, she would read our fortunes with the tea leaves. So we'd finish our tea, she'd turn the cups over, rotate them 3 times, turn them over again, and then she would read our fortune in the tea leaves. And not only did we have fun inside Grandview, we also had a lot of fun outside Grandview Gardens in Chinatown. Next slide, please. One of my favorite things was every year there would be this carnival, and it took place on the corner of College and Hill and the LA Chinatown Corporation parking lot. So as you can see here, this is a photo of my 2 older sisters, and you can see the carnival rides in the background. There were some great fun games. My 2 favorite were one was the coin toss, where you would toss like a dime or a quarter, and if it landed in the glassware and it stayed there, you got to keep that glassware. So I used to have a little set of ashtrays that I won. I wish I had kept them. And then my second favorite game was this horse track race game where you pull the lever, you chose a horse, and then you pull the lever, and if your horse got to the track at the end first, you were the winner, and you get a little metal horse. And if you kept playing it and won again, you would upgrade to a bigger and bigger horse. Something else I really enjoyed, which you saw in the video that Calvin played, was the wishing well. Daddy would give us coins, and we would go to the wishing well and try to get them in those little bowls. That was so much fun. And another favorite memory I have of Chinatown was at the Central Plaza. near the original Phoenix Bakery location, which you saw in Kelvin's video, there would be a man that would be there on the weekends. He had a music box with a crank, and he had a pet monkey, a little spider monkey. And the monkey was dressed up, I think it wore a vest and it had a hat. And Daddy would give us coins. I would give, usually dimes. I would give the monkey, you got to hand the monkey your dime. The monkey would take it from your hand, and then he would tip his hat to you. And that was just really fun, wonderful, wonderful memories. Also, next slide, please. So there were celebrities, as Calvin mentioned, that would go to Chinatown. And one night we were dining there, and Cesar Romero was also at the restaurant. So this is my little sister outside of the restaurant with Cesar Romero. Also in the 60s and the 70s, there was a popular singer named Kenny Rankin. Some of you may remember him. Anyway, Daddy would tell us if he knew somebody famous was coming into Chinatown to do a film shoot. So Kenny Rankin was coming into Chinatown to do a television segment for, I think, for a variety show. And so my sisters were really excited about Kenny Rankin being in Chinatown. So they made certain that they were in Chinatown the day of the shoot. And when he finished filming, they went over to, and it was in the Central Plaza where he filmed. So they went over there and wow, they found a half-empty Sprite can that Kenny Rankin had drank out of. So of course they had to take that Sprite can and bring it home, and that sat in their bedroom on the bookshelf for years and years, that Sprite can. That was so exciting. Anyway, another time I remember Daddy calling home, and I answered the phone, and he said, "Have you heard of someone named Barbara Streisand?" "Yes, she's a movie star, Daddy. Why?" "She's in the restaurant." And then another time he called home and I happened to answer, "Have you heard of someone named Richard Burton?" "Yes, he's a movie star, Daddy. Why?" "He's in the restaurant." So that was really exciting. And I also remember a story that Walt Disney came into Grandview Gardens one day, and I believe this was prior to the 60s, maybe in the 50s or the 40s, but he came in and dined there and drew Mickey Mouse on a napkin and gave that napkin to the waiter. Next, please. This is an autograph by Cesar Romero to my sister, Cindy. So it reads, "To Cindy from Cesar Romero, the Joker." Cesar Romero was the first actor ever to play the Joker from Batman on film. Next, please. And Grandview Gardens is featured or mentioned in a number of books, probably about 10 books by my count. So here you see it's in a couple of Chinese Historical Society books, but also it's featured and mentioned in Lisa C's On Gold Mountain, which is a New York Times best-selling book. Next. And also in a book about the history of Chinese food in the United States, the book From Canton Restaurant to Panda Express. And then it's also in at least 3 books on architecture because of Harwell Hamilton Harris's notable works as an architect. One of the most popular books is the book by Lisa Germany, Harwell Hamilton Harris, and there is a section on Grandview Gardens. Next, please. So Grandview Gardens is also featured in multi-Grammy Award-winning artist K.D. Lang's album, All You Can Eat. It's on the back cover. Next, please. So this may be one of the photos, last photos of Grandview Gardens when it was still standing. You can see that it's here, it's the back cover of K.D. Lang's album, and you can see it shows Grandview after it was closed. before it was demolished, actually. Next, please. So this is one of the last photos, probably the last photo of me at the restaurant. This was taken in 1976 when I was a student at UCLA. I'm on the left, my friend Amy, who also was a student at UCLA. We both lived in the dorms. This was taken by my father. He was standing in the bar, and you can see the piano lounge in the background with Tyrus Wong's mural. And as a young adult, it was fine that I was in the bar. But as a young child, that section of the restaurant I tried to avoid, because to me as a young girl, it was dark, it was cold, it was scary, it was eerie. So behind the piano, there was this, there was a painting of a woman, a Chinese woman with a blue face. Her face was kind of the blue, basically the blue color that you see here on the the outside of the photos, that color blue. And she scared me. And then I thought that I felt like the swordsmen and women would come out of that mirror and chase after me. And then here's this huge Buddha that's like, I felt like 10 feet tall. And I always thought the Buddha might come to life. But anyway, next slide, please. So I'm very proud of my father. During the 50th anniversary of Chinatown in 1988, there was a celebration by the city of Los Angeles honoring the pioneers of New Chinatown. And my father was one of the 4 people that were honored. And in this photo, I believe that you can see Tyrus Wong's mural in the background. So this was taken, I think they might have moved it, but this was shot in Grandview Gardens. And there's my little sister, Cindy, on the left, my father and myself on the right. Next, please. The next shots were also taken that same evening in Chinatown in 1988. And to the left, at the left photo, you see my father and myself, and you can see the Buddha has now been moved from the bar to the near the entrance of the restaurant. And on the photo to the right, which was taken in Hong Kong Lo, we see my father and the 3 other honorees there. Next, please. A few days later, all the honorees were celebrated in the city hall by some of the city officials. So here we see my father with LA County Supervisor Gloria Molina. And then on the right is Council Member Mike Wu. And in the background, there are 3 of the other honorees. Next, please. So I love this photo because it shows Daddy with the Buddha in the background in Grandview Gardens. A couple of stories he told me that I can recall are one time at Grandview, it was closing time, and there was one patron in the bar who was not ready to leave. Perhaps he had a little too much to drink. And as much as the staff politely tried to ask him to leave the restaurant, they did all the closing duties. They were all ready to go. He was still there in the bar, refusing to leave. So they had to think of some plan to get him out, and they decided to turn a cold shoulder on him. Literally, they turned on the AC full blast, and they basically froze him out of the restaurant. He felt so uncomfortable, he finally decided to leave. Another time, Daddy told me that the restaurant was so crowded, patrons were packed in the restaurant, in the entry area, outside the front door, down the steps. He could not get into the restaurant himself. So he had to go around the back and enter on the Hill Street side. There is a saying I'm sure you've heard, home is where the heart is. And if this is true, then my father's home was Los Angeles, Chinatown. Even after his retirement in the 1970s, he had to be in Chinatown. So he would drive there every day and spend his day in Chinatown. He would go into the clubhouse, read the Chinese newspapers, read the LA Times, read books, walk around Chinatown, eat in Chinatown, and then at the end of the day, he would come back to his house in Eagle Rock. And even after he was unable to drive, he still made it to Chinatown. He still had to be in Chinatown. So he would walk a half an hour to the bus stop, take the bus into Chinatown, spend his days there, take the bus back, walk, and the house in Eagle Rock was up this really big hill. He would walk all the way up the hill, another half hour or so to get home. And he did this for many, many years. My father's home was not his house in Eagle Rock. It was Chinatown. So in closing, I would like to say thank you to the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California and all its supporters for preserving the history of this special place that is Los Angeles, Chinatown, this place that was my father's true home. Also, I would like to thank Calvin Wong, my cousin, for collaborating with me on this presentation, and to Mark Collier for his research and acquisition of Grandview Gardens memorabilia. Now I believe my cousin Calvin Wong would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Sophia. Ditto. Thank you for having us. Really appreciate you giving us time to tell our stories. Again, thank you to my cousin Sophia, helped me out in working with her on this project. And of course, my brothers and sisters, Carol, Clifford, and Curtis, because they gave me a lot of information that I didn't even remember. So thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin and Sophia. You know, this is just an amazing narrative that you presented to us. It's just wonderful that you have all of these great images, you have these great stories, and what you're sharing really is what it was like to have a family run business and all of the interaction that was involved. So, and you're sharing it from the inside view. You know, most of us have been at the Grandview Gardens in the past, and I know I often drove up to the takeout dim sum window too in the past, as well as attended dinners at the place. So your memories are really wonderful. I want to share some questions here, and maybe we can, I know that we won't be able to get to all of them. And thank you everyone in the audience. Thank you. You know, if we were sitting at the room at Casteller School or the CACA Lodge for our meeting, you would basically fill up the place. I see that there are 59 plus people in the audience, and so it would be a full house. So thank you all for joining in. I want to share a couple of the questions. I should start off with an early question. Calvin, what size was that model that was created?
Yeah, I think it was about 3 feet by 2 feet. The restaurant was 6,000 square feet, so that's the ratio that would have been about that size.
Do you know where that model is by chance?
In a landfill.
Oh, okay. Well, that's unfortunate, but it was a planning model, so that's obvious. I do want to mention, by the way, that you showed the image of the original restaurant at Alameda and Ferguson Alley. It so happens that by one way or another, the Historical Society has ended up with a one of the Ferguson Alley street signs. So if anyone wants to see that street sign, we have it with a little poster about the Ferguson Alley location. So the Ferguson was a pretty historic location. I see other questions. Let's see. Is the footage of that video somewhere that can be watched later? And the answer is partly yes. We previously showed some of that video in an earlier program that the Historical Society presented on Tyrus Wong's murals. And I believe most, if not all of that footage was there without as much commentary, without any of the commentary that Calvin provided today. What we'll do is, and so that footage is embedded in the presentation that was previously shown. It's on the Historical Society's website. If you go to chssc.org and look at past programs, you should be able to catch that footage. And I imagine if you want to get a closer look, you can stop the motion and make a closer observation. But it is great, terrific footage. And thanks, Calvin, for identifying all the persons in there, because before I don't think we had that. I'm looking for other questions here. Let me see here. A commentary I want to mention from Bernice Waugh. She says, my father is Raymond Yep, who was the bartender at Grandview Gardens for many years. I enjoyed seeing the old photos and especially got such a thrill seeing my father in the old film. So he was in that video.
Yeah.
I shouldn't call it video because back then it was real film. So anyway, I remember my father giving me an autograph of Bob Hope and I believe a few other celebrities. Unfortunately, I don't remember what happened to the autographs. My father used to bring New Year's Eve hats, whistles home for me. And as Bob Hope used to say, thanks for the memories. So Bernice really appreciated seeing the
I loved it. I
Yeah.
really loved it. Can anybody see this? Here's a picture of my father. Maybe you could recognize him. Can you see that?
You have to turn it a little bit at an angle to face us.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
There,
Yeah.
it's better. Yeah, but
that's Raymond Yip.
He
well,
looks very familiar.
with your permission,
Yes.
you know, our archival team would love to get their hands on it to get a copy of it so that we could
I'd love to send it to you.
include it. Okay, that's wonderful.
I can take a picture of it and I can,
Well, that's great. Anyway, hey, you know, I didn't realize that we would be able to have audio from all of the audience here. And there's really a lot of, I see many friends and also some new people joining us today. And hopefully we'll all become friends also as time passes.
can I email this to you?
Yes, you can, you know, but maybe the best thing is to send us your email address. Maybe what we can do is make arrangements for our archivist team, archival team, to take a good quality, because we have some really good scanners and we can get a good photo of that. So
Of course.
Yeah.
I can give you my email now if you like.
let's do this offline. You know, why don't we just
Okay.
send it on the chat or the Q&A.
I'd like to say a quick thank you to Bernice's father because he used to make Shirley temples for me. And,
Oh,
instead,
yes.
and instead of one cherry, he would give me 4.
Oh, he
And he
spoiled
used to
you.
always put
I
it in a
got
beautiful
one.
umbrella.
I only got one cherry. He liked you better than he liked me. That's okay.
Yeah.
My dad was really the sweetest guy, the sweetest man. So no, I would, okay, on chat, I will Okay, I'm not really good at it, but I will send you my email.
And yeah, we have a few comments of appreciation from people like Melissa Yi Chan and Grayson Ricky Leo, and also Linda B. Must be Linda Bentz. Okay. And also from Angela. I see Munson mentioned that the Grandview Gardens was shown in a major exhibit at the LA County Museum of Art on Culture and Arts of the 20th century LA. And so Munson must have a record of that exhibit. I don't know when that was, and maybe you'll have to refresh our memory here. Are we able to
It's
unmute
around,
everybody? I don't
Gene,
want to
it was around the
extend.
year 2000 or 2001, and it actually was featuring the significance of Hamilton Harwell Harris. Grandview Garden, I remember the caption at that time was the only commercial property he ever designed in Los Angeles. It's that significant,
Yeah.
There were, um,
For the
there were
audience,
many-
as far as I know. That's
Yeah.
what the LACMA guys were saying.
he designed homes in the foothills of LA,
Yeah, his
Pasadena.
archive now is down in Texas. I think it was the University of Houston.
the
And
University of
therefore, the
Austin.
drawings are really there, right, Sophie?
They're stored at the University of Austin. And there were many architects
Austin.
who,
Yes.
yes, University of Texas in Austin. There are many architects who were very disappointed that the building was taken down. I believe that there were even a small group of people who were trying to get the building saved for its historical significance, being that it was a Harwell Hamilton Harris design.
And I have a question from Yuk Louis. What happened to the Tyrus Wong murals? Were they preserved? And I just want to back up to my earlier comment. We had a program about Tyrus Wong's murals previously. We have the murals protected in our archives at the moment, so they're not yet available for public viewing, but we do have them. But do catch our prior program, because you'll get more close-up detail on the murals and on the figures that Tyrus, our late Tyrus Wong, late great Tyrus Wong, painted, and for the restaurant, specifically for the restaurant.
Mhm.
That was part of the remodeling that Calvin mentioned in 1962. And
I
by
was
the
at-
way, the 1962 signs that were outside signs that were designed by Milton Kwan are still standing partially. So some of the form is still there. I see Cheryl, you're in the audience here. So your dad did a great job with that. Anyway, any other questions? I see some comments, but everyone's pretty happy here. I don't see any burning questions. There's one that I think I answered already about the new Grand East, because that was a separate restaurant, not Grandview Gardens. So given that it is about 8:05, a little bit past, if there aren't any other questions, I want to just thank all of you for attending. We have
Thank
many
you.
other, and we have, and really, I want to actually, if we were in the room, we would obviously have a round of applause for our speakers, our guest speakers, Calvin and Sophia. I mean, it's a great presentation, and it all makes us more aware of all of the connections that many of us have with this aspect of our history. Some of us grew up in restaurants, some of us grew up in laundries, some of us grew up in grocery stores, or a sewing factory. And it is all part of the culture and history of our community. We, the Historical Society, have been going through this process of collecting and sharing our history since 1975. And we're happy to do more. Next month, on November 2nd, Wednesday night, we will be presenting David Lay, who is a culture historian who will be talking a bit about lion dancing and the culture of lion dance, Cantonese style lion dance specifically. So what we will learn about is really what he has seen in his Bay Area community over the decades. And we'll be sharing a little bit more about the details of what goes into a lion dance performance and what all of the symbolism is, the beating of the drums and the movements of the lions. So we look forward to learning a little bit about some of our cultural history. Looking further ahead, we had a very successful Yosemite pilgrimage this year. Despite the fires that occurred in the southern edge of Yosemite, our planning team quickly relocated the whole focus to the outside edge of Yosemite at Lee Vining. And then from there, we ventured into the Tioga Road. We took many hikes and learned a lot about the Chinese American heritage of Yosemite. And finally, the smoke died down enough that many of us were able to go view the Chinese Laundry, the new Chinese Laundry building. Well, actually, it's an old Chinese Laundry building that has new exhibits in it, so that we can learn more, and so that general visitors to Yosemite can learn about the contributions of early Chinese to the development of that park and all the work that was done up in the mountains. So there are many more programs coming ahead, and we invite you to join the Historical Society if you'd like to help support us. It's end of year, and we're looking toward our programming for the new year, and we're trying to put together a budget. We have a financial team that's looking at ideas and programs and the ways and means and how to accomplish that. We're going through a process of upgrading our facilities. We have architectural plans in plan check with the city of LA that hopefully will be approved very soon, and we'll have a general contractor start work if we have the funds. So we will let you know next month what the budget likely will be. I would like to kind of close with a tribute to a friend. Gosh, I didn't think it would be that hard. Last night, we lost a friend, a longtime member, a scholar, community scholar, and he was a father, a husband, and a friend to many of us. And that was Gilbert Hom. Gilbert, unfortunately, has gone through a series of health issues, and unfortunately, we lost him yesterday. I wanted to just offer maybe just a quick moment of silence. I don't know how to really deal with this because I'm sure it affects many of us in our community. And really what we heard today was really a story about a family and how it succeeded in a community where Chinese were not always we're not the dominant culture necessarily, but we're able to find success and support their families, and kids went to college. Well, Gilbert was a person who really had that great insight and was able to listen and to learn from people. And that's what our Chinatown has been about, is about the people who built our community. What I'd like to do is just to offer just a few seconds of silence for Gilbert, who was my friend. So thank you all for joining us. We want to support the collecting and the research and the sharing of our history. Gilbert was one of the best, and most of you don't know it, but there are scholars out there who have built their research on some of the material that he collected. And so he's one of these behind the scenes community historians. And I, for one, really appreciated all that he brought to our community. So thank you very much. Have a great evening, and may peace be with all of you.